Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've made the connection and are with us today. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us in ways that get us thinking, get us imagining, get us exploring, get us connected, and perhaps inspired or challenged to do just a bit more because we've made the connection. So our topic today is imagining a better future. And a quote from our guest, the best sci-fi is a mirror. Jeffrey Morris is a Black director based here in the Twin Cities. He's been working in film and TV for years and has 2 feature documentaries in the works. He will be part of the Twin Cities Film Festival with a special on Tuesday, October 22nd. He was inspired by Star Trek, space, 1999, and others, and he's touching a nerve with his thoughts on space exploration in the future. It's a muscle memory for those of us maybe a little bit older, a muscle memory of decades when we looked to the stars and could imagine ourselves really traveling there. Welcome, Jeffrey. We're so glad you're here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your sense of hope and how the best sci-fi is a mirror.
Well, it's interesting. It's funny. I guess I'm. Over the years, people have said you're such an optimist, and I'm like I am, because I actually think of myself more as a realist, and I guess the more that I've sort of self-reflected, I realize I guess I'm a positive realist. That would be the term, right? Yeah, and so I don't know how much of an optimist, but definitely a positive realist, and so realism meaning you have to take a look at what's really going on, right? What are the realities of our current situation, and then I think something that science fiction is really good at is projecting into the future. So you say, all right, we're here right now. What might it be like 10 years from now? What might it be like 100 years from now? What might it be like 1,000 years from now? Those sorts of questions, right? And I think that part of what gets you there is to take a look at the past, right? You say, all right, so if I want to figure out what it's going to be like 10 years from now, maybe one of the things I can do is take a look back at what it was like 10 years ago. I want to look at 100 years from now. I'll look at what are the changes that happened from since 100 years ago, that sort of thing. And when I say a mirror, the best science fiction is a mirror. The idea is that it's really a reflection of our existing time, where we are at present, and it allows us to, by projecting into, say, the future, near future, far future, it allows us to look back at ourselves in the present, into today. And that's what I mean by that when I say the best sci-fi is a mirror. And Gene Roddenberry, when he created Star Trek, the original Star Trek, his goal was to actually produce a show about the 1960s. Originally, he wanted to do a program about all the social upheaval and the issues that were, and he pitched that to the network, and the networks were like, "No, we're already dealing with that on the nightly news, and people want to watch TV to escape." So he decided, I'll create a show that's set 300 years in the future, and I'll use that as a means to talk about what's going on right now in the 1960s. So it was brilliant. So that's what I was. Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I wanted to bring that up as well. The name of the show that I do is called Connections, and I've never shared this before, but the reason I call it Connections is my father was a physicist, an aerospace engineer, and he would always say to me, the most important thing is finding the connections. Always look for it. And so every guest that I've had on, I always look for those connections. So as I was reading about you, I thought back to my father. I thought back to me being a little kid. My dad was one of the whiz kids that was recruited in the Kennedy administration. And at the same time, my mom was really active in the civil rights. And then after the assassination, we moved to Pasadena, and we lived kitty corner from Caltech. And when I was 7 years old and Star Trek comes out, it's space age. And it was filled with possibilities. My father's scientists his friends would come in, and they were totally enchanted with Star Trek. My mom, who is active in civil rights, loved the multicultural. I mean, here we are in the middle of the Cold War. We've got Chekhov on the bridge, and we've got Sulu, and we had my hero, Uhura, and she was smart, and she was beautiful, and she was a leader. And she was making connections to other life forms. And so I'd go to school with I'd bring a thimble and I put a thimble in my ear and we'd go up on the jungle gym and we'd slide onto the planet. Although I'd stay up on the bridge because I needed to connect with the other life forms. And so I would be communicating with the life forms and telling, the folks that were exploring the planet, on the playground, what was going on. I'd narrate the adventure. And then
Oh my gosh.
Years later, here I am. I'm a communicator, but I'm
Uh-huh.
also working for a foundation that promotes multicultural inclusion. And it comes back to that love of Star Trek. I mean, I was
That's
7 years
amazing.
old,
That's
and
amazing. I just jumping in just really quickly.
yeah.
I had such similar
Mhm.
experiences on the playground. One of my friends who I actually showcased in the second documentary we're doing called Return to Tomorrow. We've got 2 that we're doing right now. But my friend, I grew up in Tempe, Arizona. My childhood was there, and we literally every day on the playground in those early years, we would pretend some sort of sci-fi thing. We were either doing
Mhm.
Lost in Space or we were doing Star Trek, and that sort of thing. Later years, we did Logan's Run, but we had all these different visions of the future that we would pretend. And we would use the playground equipment as our spaceships and stuff, and then we'd go down. Yeah, then we'd go down on the planet's surface, and we go. And I just feel like what I'm trying to get across to people with the work that I'm doing is that there's more to it than us just being a bunch of kids pretending that when we were doing this back then. We really felt like this was a reflection of what was to come.
Yes.
Right, and where we were headed, and it wasn't just a bunch of kids playing around. This was us actually sort of exploring what we felt was ahead of us, and everything. So
Where we were going to be. We were going to
exactly,
be on that bridge.
exactly,
We were going
exactly.
to explore the new frontier.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's something that I think is really, really missing nowadays. And so when you ask me but my messages or the perspective on
Mhm.
hope that I have, a lot of it for me is that I actually think we need to go back a little bit. And something that I'm trying to do is actually bring those visions of the past to today. Right. And so I did some work with some 5th graders recently where I was actually showing them some of the science fiction from the 1970s. And they ate it up. They absolutely loved it. And they had so many questions and they were so intrigued by it. And what I was realizing is that, the vision of the future has gotten so dark. It kind of started getting dark in the 1980s, if you think about it. It's like I kind of consider the movie Alien, not that there weren't dark, obviously things like Planet of the Apes, and there were darker visions of the future, right? Back in the 1970s.
They had a storyline that underneath it was sort of a lesson of life.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. There was that sort of Rod Serling Twilight Zone moral to the story thing, right? Yeah,
Where
and so
it got just scary for the sake of scary.
Right. I think you hit a really good point, because if you think about it, there was no hope. It's like
No.
You're absolutely right. It's like Planet of the Apes said there was a message there of like, we're on the wrong path. We literally, humans right now, are on the wrong path, and if we keep going in the direction, that's what the Statue of Liberty at the end of Planet of the Apes was trying to say. It was a gut punch. It was a gut punch of, you keep doing what we're doing, this is where we're going to head. Right now. But you're absolutely right. When you look at the movie Alien, there's no hope at the end of that. There's no message to it. It's just this thing happens. It kills lots of people, and right. And then you look at something like Blade Runner, which was a movie that I actually really like a lot. It's one of my favorite films of all time. But we're talking 1982, and there's another very dark vision of the future that started to evolve, right? And then you go to Terminator. And then you keep going from those, right? And it just keeps getting darker and darker. And so then nowadays you have things more like in the last, 10, 20 years, you've got, the Hunger Games and, other, these constant sort of dystopic visions of where we're headed, right? And Mad Max is another one that started in the 1980s, but they're still making these Mad Max movies now, right? And there's a recent TV series. It's based on a series of books called The Expanse that I really like a lot. I don't know if you've ever read it or not, but The Expanse is a great series. And they made a TV series of it, which has a lot of diversity, and it's a very interesting take on humanity in the solar system a few hundred years from now, The Expanse. But the problem is, it's not a world that any of us would want to live in. It's pretty awful. it's pretty dark and pretty violent, and a lot of despair. So the thing that I've felt is that I want to leap back to the optimism of what we saw in the 1960s, early 1970s, and I want to rekindle that. And I think we have to actually go back. Even shows like Star Trek now, the new versions of Star Trek, I think, for me personally, they're too dark. They're very, very dark, and it's just like they've lost the optimism. It's just.
But it's interesting because you said earlier how it reflects our times, right? And I noticed also that your college degree was in poli-sci and filmmaking. Our politics are kind of grim right now. It's a scary time. I love, the sense of hope that Kamala is bringing. And I'm hoping that that's a turning point for a lot of our arts and a lot of our dreams and our science and what we can be. But we are in a dark place. We've got a world that's kind of shaken up right now. So it's not terribly surprising, to see that the film and the art has become commercialized dark.
Oh, no question.
And in the 60s and 70s, we were still sort of struggling to believe, the Kennedy vision of,
Well, I think you also had, civil rights and women's rights and all these things that were, and I also think that we live in a time now where and I see a lineage. There's a progression to this, though, right? It's like the reason why I talk about, Alien in the late 1970s, 79, and then to Blade Runner, into Mad Max and Terminator and that sort of thing. There's a path, right? There's a pathway, a pattern. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if you even go back to looking back at I think I know that there are many people who see the Reagan era as this positive thing. I at the time it wasn't. I didn't.
I had a difficult time.
Politically, I saw it differently. I'm just going to leave it at that.
I'll leave it at that with me as well.
Leave it at that. Politically, I saw it differently, and I certainly at the time, was tremendously concerned as a teenager about nuclear war and the potential of conflict with Russia and that sort of thing. And it's very sad to see us back to that. Like all the progress that seemed to have been made, and we've lost it now. It seems that we're right back there again, and then we also have the stupidity of, I gotta be careful when I say this, but I think that like social media has two sides, right? There's the amazing aspect. Like there are people that I've met through social media that I never in a million years would have thought I'd be able to connect with and develop relationships with. There are scientists that I admired, and artists and progressive individuals, people that I've met through social media that I never would have been able to meet otherwise. But I've also encountered, there's this, the anti-intellectualism, the conspiracy theories, seeing all this
lies spread so quickly.
Oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
So it's combating so much of, because I think part of challenges in multiculturalism, tribal, and people have unconscious biases, and there's this, but it's just all the things that have not been said that maybe have been deep inside some people are coming out more freely. And maybe it is, at one point I remember Obama saying that, we need to look at this as sort of, opening a sore and letting, the infection and be able to heal. Maybe that's going to happen with all of this. I'm hoping so. But I do appreciate that you are bringing a vision of hope and want to get us back on that track. I need to take a break, but I want to promote that in our next segment, we're going to be talking more about the Eagle documentary. And to learn more about the Eagle documentary, you can go to eagledocumentary.com. We'll also be talking about Future Dude. I love what you're doing with that. And we'll be right back just after a few short commercials. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and our topic today is imagining a better future. And a quote from our guest, the best sci-fi is a mirror. We have Jeffrey Morris joining us, a director based here in the Twin Cities, and he's been working in film and TV for years, and we've been talking about Star Trek and we've been talking about childhood memories and the beauty of hope and dreams and looking up at the stars and imagining ourselves being there, being able to be in the future. And looking at, I remember you saying on one of the podcasts I listened to that you consider this more space fantasy than science fiction.
Well, I don't consider my work to be. I would say that, yeah, I think that what I think people get wrong is that they consider Star Wars to be science fiction, and Star Wars is absolutely not remotely science fiction. It's a fantasy story that takes place in space with space environments and technological and aspects and things like that, right? But it's really it's just as much a fantasy, something like Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways, And I think whereas something like The Martian, the movie The Martian, that would be classified much more as science fiction, where it's really taking real physics, and even if you stretch it a little bit, you push it, they're still working with the basis of reality, and that's what I'm trying to do with my work. Is I try to start from a place of like, what's the actual physics and science and engineering that would be required for these things to happen, and you start there. You don't just make lightsabers couldn't really happen, right? But they're really cool, but they're not. That's what I mean by that.
But the flip phones at the Star Trek.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I would say Star Trek it certainly tries to be a lot more science fiction than Star Wars does, right? I would say Star Trek at least tries to, and I think Star Trek has hugely influenced our society in terms of technology and medicine, engineering, all kinds of things. People were inspired just like we were as children, right? Yeah. They grew up to go into those vocations because they saw that and were inspired by it. I meet people, scientists all the time, who were like, I saw Star Trek and it made me want to do that, so.
And you're working on documentaries, 2 documentaries. Start out as 1, but now you've got 2 going.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I know that it's being featured, at least a presentation that you're providing through the Twin Cities Film Festival.
Oh, sure. So, I'm more, generally speaking, I've been developing some science fiction projects over the years that are more narrative based, right? But along the way, I was looking a lot at what influenced me to it turns out, when I was a child, as you and I talked about earlier, watching shows like Star Trek, there was a show called Space 1999. And Space 1999 kind of happened right smack dab, they're in this gulf between Star Wars and the Apollo missions, right? Yeah. And so there was this story about a moon base, and it was about people living on the moon and exploring space and that sort of thing. And I as a child, I first saw that show when I was 7 years old. I was blown away by it. There was a spaceship on that show called an Eagle, and the Eagle was this kind of transport the characters used on the show. They would fly to planets.
Eagle transporter.
Yes, and they would use the Eagle to go all kinds of places, right? And I just immediately fell in love with this thing because it reminded me so much of the lunar module from what NASA was using to go to the moon. And it was like this souped up advanced thing. And then you do the math and you go, okay, this show takes place in 1999. I'm a little kid right now. If I grow up and everything works out, I could be on a moon base like that show, like they're showing in that show. And I was pretty excited about that. So anyway, as a kid, my parents got me a couple of those toys of the Eagle, which I loved, and I had other friends who had them. And then over the years, I kept running into people who I would talk to, all different walks of life, different parts of the world. And I'd say, yeah, there's this show that I used to watch, and people would say, oh, that show, that had a really cool spaceship in it, right? And then I'm telling you, all kinds of people would mention this. Then I find out that there were collectors all around the world for this, and people who were building it and doing art of it and creating it. And I'm like, this is a thing. This is like, it's not just me. There are people all around the world that are just as much into this as I am. So I decided to tell a story about that and document it. And so I spent the last 2 years developing and shooting this documentary, and it's been a lot of fun.
And tell me about some of the people, because I know William Shatner is one of the folks, and you've got Barbara Bain from Space 1999. Tell us about, I love the fact that you actually did an interview with William Shatner on the Star Trek bridge, And you also recreated the eagle in London. So I want both those stories.
Oh, sure. So what's been cool for me growing up, you know, as a child, Captain Kirk was a huge hero for me,
Oh, yeah.
as was the pilot of the Eagle in the show Space 1999. It was the character's name was Alan Carter. It's played by an actor named Nick Tate. So I was able to meet Nick Tate during the production of the Eagle documentary, which was really cool. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to recreate the set from that show. And I had some friends who work on some of my other science fiction projects in England, and we got together and they said this would be super fun to recreate this. So we rebuilt the ship after 50 years, and I got Nick Tate, and we actually filmed a segment with me and him inside the Eagle, which was mind-boggling for me to go from childhood. I could never have imagined that, you know, I'm going to be sitting in this thing with the guy who did it, you know, flew it. So that was really cool. You know, I wanted to tell a bigger story about this, which was that it was all this stuff that influenced a lot of us. It wasn't just this Space 1999 thing. And you know, so I interviewed Charles Duke, who was one of the astronauts who walked on the moon. I interviewed Dr. Cyan Proctor, who was was the first Black woman to pilot a spaceship. She flew an Inspiration 4 of SpaceX, and she was hugely inspired by Star Trek. Star Trek specifically is what led her to this. And so I was telling this bigger story, and I started realizing I had like 30 hours of footage. I was like, you know what? I could actually split this up into 2 different documentaries. Exactly. And so the Eagle Obsession is really just specifically about the Eagle. So I'm pulling William Shatner and the astronauts out of that one, and I'm putting them in a second documentary called Return to Tomorrow. And so Return to Tomorrow is going to be a much bigger project that's actually going to be, we're in talks with the National Science Foundation, Arizona State University, developing an educational resource around it, creating a much bigger project that I think could impact school children and people, you know, all across the country. It's going to be really great. So, but the Eagle Obsession is targeted for completion in January, and then we're going to debut it at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York in June. That's the plan with that. So, yeah, but you're right. I did film an interview with William Shatner for the Eagle Obsession. Well, it started out with the Eagle Obsession, but it turned into Return to Tomorrow. And there's a recreation of the sets, all of the sets from the original Star Trek, down to the millimeter in Ticonderoga, New York. And Shatner goes there on occasion to talk to people and show them the sets. And I met him there, and I was able to get an exclusive interview with him, just me and him on the bridge of the Enterprise, which is pretty amazing.
That was wow.
Yeah.
So going back to Nick and 1999, and here you're in this recreation. How did he feel about being back on that set? That must have struck.
Yeah, you know, I think the thing that's really touched him is that you know, these actors are just on a show, right? It's 50 years ago. It's 1974, 75, whatever. And he's just doing a show, right? He's like, this is cool. I like doing this. I want to do a good job and everything. But you have no idea that 5 decades later, there are going to be people all around the world who are still admiring the work that you did and who are telling you, hey, you touched me. This mattered to me. And I think that is the part that really blew him away, was that somebody cared enough and was moved enough to actually do this and tell this story, you know, and everything. And so that was a really, really wonderful, nostalgic moment. And we had a great conversation. It's really cool. I can't wait for people to see it.
And with William Shatner, were you surprised at what you got into conversation with him about?
Well, the thing that was really neat about Shatner is that I didn't go down the fan path with him. I actually know quite a bit about him. He's a very, very intelligent man. Extremely well read, lots of really interesting perspectives. You know, he recently went up to the edge of space on the rocket, the Jeff Bezos' rocket, right, the Blue Origin, and that blew his mind. It was a big thing for him. So what I decided was just to talk to him a little bit about what his perspective was on, you know, where we are, humanity, our existence, that sort of thing. And he had a lot to say. And we got into all kinds of things talking about, and, you know, he's deeply concerned about climate change. And he's very concerned about how we're treating this planet and treating each other. And we had a good half-hour, 40-minute conversation where it's just the two of us talking about our concerns about the future. And he's very concerned. He's very worried about it. And I'm going to use it in the documentary as a jumping off point to talk about some other things, because it's just, there aren't answers yet to a lot of the questions that he asks me. He asked me questions as it goes. It was pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Now, at the Film Fest, folks
Mhm.
will have the opportunity to see portions of both the documentaries and
Yes.
hear from you about the process of developing them both from concept to screen.
Mhm.
Um, and you'll be doing this with another individual. Tell me about who else is going to be on that panel.
Oh, I've also got Kevin J. Anderson, who is one of the greatest science fiction and fantasy writers of all time. Kevin is really well known for he's actually co-authored dozens of Dune prequels and sequel books with the son of Dune's creator. Frank Herbert created Dune, but Brian Herbert, his son, and Kevin Anderson have collaborated on a number of projects. And Kevin's been a producer on both of the Dune movies, and actually now there's a new Dune TV series that's based upon one of his books, which is pretty cool. And he's also worked on the Star Wars, the X-Files, things like that. And Kevin and I actually even co-wrote a novel based upon my screenplay for the movie that I'm directing in the next year. So
And
a
that's
couple.
Persephone, right?
That's Persephone. Yeah. So Kevin, and I co-wrote Persephone. So Kevin's coming up, and we're gonna be able to talk, and people can meet him, and everything will be fun. I'm also going to include Anne Marie Gillen, who is a wonderful producer who I've worked with for over a decade. She's based here in the Twin Cities, but she used to run Morgan Freeman's production company. She created the classic film Fried Green Tomatoes. That was hers.
Oh, I
That
love
was
that film.
yeah, that's her. That she's actually the person behind that film and everything. She
Oh,
pulled the
wild.
project together, produced it, and everything. So she's going to be on the panel with us at all, and she's a producer of both documentaries with me. So yeah.
And how did this come about? How did you decide that this would be a great thing to do with the Twin Cities Film Festival?
It just it's always an opportunity. It's funny. Even though I'm based in the Twin Cities, most of my work is outside of the Twin Cities, and so I don't really get a lot of chance to interact with people here in the Twin Cities. Regarding my work. So in talking with the people at the film festival, we had a really simpatico on it. It was like, this would be a great opportunity for us. You've got this piece you're doing, and I was like, yeah, it'll be a great opportunity for us as well, and let's collaborate and do something. So we decided to put together this event. So it'll be on Tuesday, the 22nd, at 5:30 p.m. at the Twin Cities Film Festival.
And it goes from 5:30 to 6:30. Then there's a post-panel party, and the tickets for that can be purchased at Twin Cities Film Fest, all written out, twincitiesfilmfest.org. And then you can look up the Eagle Obsession off of that to find your tickets. It is separate from the regular film series. This is you'll not see the whole documentary because the Eagle is coming out in January. Is that right? And then the other
it's going to be completed in January. But the because we're still editing. And they're still doing a lot of visual effects and things like that. It's going to be really cool. I think people are going to be. The thing I'm excited, if I could just jump into this really quickly, is that I'm hoping that this is not something where you have to like science fiction. You have to be into space. You have to be. I consider this to be a cultural documentary more than anything, which is it's one of those stories where I hope people. I've done that before. I'll just click on a documentary and go, this is a topic I've never heard of, but I'm interested because it's kind of cool, and you learn something. And that's what this documentary is. That my whole goal with this is that people could watch this and go, I've never heard of this. This is pretty interesting, though. And so you don't have to be a science fiction person at all to see what we've done with this. So
I would encourage everyone to be a part of learning about what you're doing. And we will be talking more about how people can get even involved in supporting you with your Eagle documentary. And that's eagledocumentary.com. And that's the website about the documentary that Jeffrey's been working on. And we'll be right back after just a few short commercials. And we're going to learn a little bit more about Future Dude Entertainment as well. And the work being done in the Twin Cities as well as all over the world. Thank you, Jeffrey. We'll look forward to talking to you just after these commercials. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. And we have had the pleasure of having a chance to speak with Jeffrey Morris, a director here in the Twin Cities. The topic of our day today is imagining a better future. And as Jeffrey has said, the best sci-fi is a mirror. So we ended the last segment with saying this is not just for the folks that are interested in science fiction. It's really a cultural documentary that we are promoting. And I think if you're interested in looking in a mirror and looking at yourself and looking at the world around you, you'll be interested in this documentary. So thank you, Jeffrey, for coming to share with us about the work that you're doing on the Eagle documentary that's now split in two. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
And just to remind folks, these two upcoming documentary films are part of Future Dude Entertainment, and they're going to be presented, at least parts of them, at the Twin Cities Film Festival. And that's down at the Marcus West End Theater, and it's on Tuesday, October 22nd. And if you go to the Twin Cities Film Fest website, you'll be able to buy tickets for us. Ticket holders will be able to see a sneak preview, at least part of The Eagle Obsession. And that's a documentary that follows the Future Dude Entertainment founder, director, and writer, Jeffrey Morris, who's with us today. And we'll be learning about sort of the ongoing fascination with the iconic Eagle transporter, as well as the obsession of looking back to look forward. Where were we and where could we be? Has been a great topic of discussion this morning.
Thank you.
No. So Future Dude, tell me a little bit about Future Dude.
Well, it's funny. So my actual company name, I launched a production company in 2010 here in the Twin Cities, and it's actually called Morris FutureWorks. And I ran under that name for the first year or so. And I decided to, I was interacting with a lot of people in the realm of science, art, entertainment, and these are the worlds I run in, right? So it's like I previously had a big contract with NASA that I was doing education and public outreach with them, and then I had my background of doing commercials, music videos, film, that kind of thing. And one of the things that I was doing, I was meeting with so many interesting people. I started thinking, maybe I should start doing a blog about this. And kind of following the journey. So I created this blog. I was trying to come up with word combinations for the blog. And I was like, well, I'm not really just into space, because it's like I'm just as interested in oceanography and meteorology and,
Jacques Cousteau.
Yeah, Jacques Cousteau. Actually, I've got a big poster of, I wish you could see this, I could show you, but I've got a big picture of Jacques Cousteau right next to my desk in my office. Carl Sagan, also a huge hero of mine. And so anyway, I decided I was like, I'm more into talking about the future than I am just space, right? So I decided to word combos. I was thinking about Bill Nye the Science Guy, different things like that. And so I came up with, I was like, wait a minute, Future Dude, how do I popularize science? Popularize it. And I was like, I want people to, like Carl Sagan did, bring it down to earth, right? So I came with this thing. I was like, Future Dude, that sounds cool, right? And I ran it past people like, that sounds cool. So I bought futuredude.com and I set it up and I started doing this blog. And within the first few months, I had like 50,000 hits on it, which was a shock, right? And I was at this in 2012. I launched the blog in early 2012, and later that year, I was at a symposium in Washington D.C. and I'm walking through this thing. And this guy goes, "Hey, you're that Future Dude guy." It's like, whoa, So I didn't expect that at all, right? So it seemed to really catch on. So by like 2013, I decided to rename the company around Future Dude and rebrand it. And so Future Dude Entertainment, I'm not trying to do this sting thing where I'm like, I'm Future Dude necessarily or anything like that. But I think it's kind of a cool, it's a cool moniker, and it's a cool way to get people to ask questions and go, what's this about? What you trying to do?
It captures the imagination.
And that's the idea. Yeah.
And it ties in also with what you were saying earlier about working with kids. I know that's important to you. I mean, I think it probably stems from what we were talking about in the first segment about both of our childhoods being so fascinated with science fiction and the possibilities. And you shared in the last segment about how you work with some kids and showed them some of those, 70s, 60s and 70s shows. Tell me what it's like to work with kids and what your hope is in working with kids to have them see a future that has possibility.
It's interesting. It goes back to, I've been working in education since the mid 90s, off and on. And I even ran a nonprofit here in the Twin Cities called Project Universe for a while. And I've worked with K through 12. I've also worked at the college level, with students. And the thing that I've found consistently is that I think young people are looking for hope. They're looking for something there's no future anymore. That's the thing that I think is going wrong. It's like, when we were kids, there was a future. We used to believe like, hey, it's going to be, there will be this, there will be that. For a lot of young people right now, it's all about, I want to be an influencer. I want to be right. I want to be popular. I want to be considered attractive. I want to be considered cool. I want to have lots of material wealth, right? But these things, none of them have to do with, I want to cure cancer. I want to stop climate change. I think there are young people who do feel that way, but I'm talking about the general movement is much more about this sort of almost narcissistic kind of, and it's not their fault, right? But it's just,
and part of it is the social media that we talked about.
That's where it's going to go. It's social media. Social media is the problem,
it sucks you into this other world.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the fact that we didn't grow up with anything like that, we think about we had what 3 TV stations and
black and white
and right
and the little 12 months done.
Oh yeah, and I was thinking, I'm talking to my kids about the fact that we didn't have. When we were little, they weren't even VCRs yet, and everything, right? Because let alone having streaming where you can just instantaneously watch whatever you want to watch right now, So I think that's
go outside and play and recreate it in
exactly. And I remember seeing movies back in the 70s and before the soundtracks would come out, and sometimes the soundtracks would take a year or longer to come out. It was records, right? And I would remember seeing a movie and trying to memorize the music so I could sing it. You know what I mean? It's just a different world. It was a different world, right? So my point is, I really feel like a lot of our cultural issues that young people are facing right now, I think things would change radically if we could reinvigorate a positive vision of the future and say we can have. It's not about homogenizing everyone or losing the aspect of the idea of diversity, but wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if all of us could kind of collectively, or many of us, say we all want to be smart, we all want to be we all want to be good people, we all want to make the world a better place, we all want to like it's hungry, we want no one hungry, no one unhoused, no one everyone having the same, at least, access to potential, quality healthcare, having opportunity, education, I think about these billionaires right now, and I'm looking at what's happening politically with some of these billionaires jumping into this thing, and it's such a when I think about the power and the wealth that they have, and how it's so much about them. And it's so much about
narcissism,
right? Yeah, it is. And the idea to me that it's like, how could we reframe this to make it about all of us, that all of us could be moving forward and using, when I think about Starfleet and Star Trek, like how motivating the idea of what is the idea of a Starfleet, right? The idea of going to the academy and going and learning to become an explorer. And what the motivation would be like if something like that truly existed, right? Could you imagine, like, saying, hey, you got to really learn, you got to really keep yourself in shape, you've got to really be tip top, the best. That's actually another digressing very quickly. One of the things that also I feel is missing that used to exist. I feel like the role models were so much stronger in some ways. I would, when I would watch those shows and those characters, it wasn't like they were coming from the aspect of being flawed. It was like they were actually people who were working to be their best, and then they were challenged. These are individuals who had it together. Yeah,
they had a moral fiber, and then they had an ethical challenge that was thrown their way.
It's thrown their way, right? And what we saw,
how do they work?
How do they overcome that? How do they overcome the challenge that's thrown at them? And it feels like a lot of the media now is, this is a broken, flawed individual, and they've got all these problems, and then somehow the experience of this will somehow turn them into someone better, And it's a very strange thing to me. And that's something that I also feel like is like, I want to get back to these stronger, better role models in a lot of ways. I think that we could create characters that young people could look up to and go, I want to be that. I want to be able to excel and become someone like that. And so the stories I'm trying to tell in my science fiction with Future Dude are going to be, it's like looking at adventures like, going to the North Pole for the first time, climbing Mount Everest, going to, these are all things that have extreme challenge to them.
But also have a dream that inspired it.
Right. Someone said, could we go there? Could I do that? Could I make that happen? And then they have to develop, the means to do it, and then face the challenges of trying to accomplish it. I think that's an incredible story. And I don't think you need monsters and aliens and space battles and fights and all this stuff to tell those stories. I think there's a lot of interesting human drama and peril and adventure that could occur with those sorts of stories. And that's what I want to do.
And it taps at a deeper place. Because we can, sure, we can go to see a film. It's kind of like a roller coaster that, scares us and we scream and okay. But you walk out and it was popcorn, what was there? But the ones that make a difference, that make you think, the ones that, touch your heart and go, how I have to believe that a lot of folks went to the Peace Corps after believing that they could make a difference. And we don't have that sense of, I want to serve the government. I mean, the government has become something that people are uncomfortable with instead of, excited that we can serve our country. And I too would love to see a world where there's hope, where there's belief, where there's connection, where we can be something more. Well, I want to promote both of your websites, the Eagle documentary. Excellent. Go take a look at that. And then do consider joining the panel presentation, going to see it 5:30 to 6:30 with a post party. And that's at the Twin Cities Film Fest. And then check out futuredude.com and all the wonderful things that you're doing there. I'd love to have you just do a short shout out. I know that when I was reading through some of your materials, you actually chose to come to Minneapolis.
I did.
And I'd love to have you just close with, why did you choose here? And are you happy that you did?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where I really, really appreciate you asking me this. I moved to the Twin Cities in 1988, and I had a choice after college to go. Do I go to Los Angeles, where most filmmakers go, or do I try something different? And I came up here, and I there was something about the vibe and the things that were going on with Prince and the music, the Minneapolis sound, and it felt like a place where I could excel and succeed. And I decided to build a basis as an entrepreneur here, and I've had a tremendously positive experience working with the community here, working with had the mayor of Minneapolis actually take me under his wing back when I first moved up here in the first few years. And I can literally track my interaction with him to so many positive things that happened, working with the Carlson School of Management, working with the University of St. Thomas, working with investors here in the Twin Cities.
And the Science Museum of Minnesota.
Yeah, I worked with the Science Museum extensively. Yeah, I've worked with normal number of schools, Breck School, St. Paul Academy. It's been an incredible experience for me living in the Twin Cities, and I want people to know that this is, and also for me as a Black man, I felt that Minnesota has actually been very, very welcoming and very positive, a great place for me to work and create.
We're glad you're here. And thank you so much for spending time with us here on Connections Radio.
Absolutely. Thank you.